Frank Lloyd Wright's $5,500 house was once considered the pinnacle of modern architecture. A stunning blend of form and function, built for the ambitious journalist Frederick C. Robie. It became an emblem of progress, a home that symbolized both innovation and the American dream. But behind the flawless design and its revolutionary structure lies a story few know. A tale of fractured dreams, hidden ambitions, and a controversial relationship that would ultimately shape its tragic legacy. What if the house you've admired for years wasn't the dream it seemed? What if its beauty was built on the ruins of something far darker? Chicago, 1908. The city roared with possibility. Frederick C. Robie stood at the threshold of everything he'd worked for. At 32 years old, he had climbed from bicycle manufacturer to executive at the Excelsior Supply Company. His success wasn't inherited. It was earned through grit, ambition, and an unshakable belief that the future belonged to those bold enough to seize it. But success demanded a symbol, something tangible, something permanent. Robie wanted a home that would announce to Chicago's elite that he had arrived. Not a Victorian mansion draped in the pretensions of old money. Not a conventional box that whispered conformity. He wanted something revolutionary, a statement carved in stone and steel that proclaimed a new century, a new way of living, a new Frederick Robie. He had been thinking about this house for years, sketching ideas, visiting buildings, studying the emerging principles of what some architects were calling the Prairie School. And one name kept surfacing in those conversations, spoken with a mixture of reverence and wariness. Frank Lloyd Wright. Wright was already famous by 1908. 41 years old, with a portfolio of stunning homes that challenged everything Americans thought they knew about domestic architecture. He built houses that seemed to grow from the land itself, long horizontal lines that echoed the Midwestern prairies, open floor plans that rejected the closed, compartmentalized rooms of Victorian tradition, windows that brought the outside in, dissolving the barrier between nature and dwelling. But Wright was more than an architect. He was a prophet of a new architectural religion. He believed buildings should reflect American democracy. Spaces should flow freely, not trap families in isolated chambers. Materials should be honest, showing their true nature rather than hiding behind ornament. And most importantly, the architect was an artist whose vision superseded all other considerations. When Robie approached Wright, the two men recognized something in each other: ambition, a refusal to accept limitations, a hunger to create something that would outlast them both. Their first meetings crackled with energy. Robie described his ideal home with the precision of an engineer and the passion of a poet. He wanted light flooding every room. He wanted privacy from the street, but openness to the sky. He wanted spaces that could adapt, that could serve multiple functions, that could grow with his young family. Wright listened. Then he began to sketch. What emerged from those early sessions was nothing short of radical. A house that stretched across its corner lot like a ship ready to sail into the future. Brick walls laid in long, elegant courses that emphasized the horizontal. Cantilevered roofs that seemed to float without visible support, extending 20 feet beyond their supporting walls. Windows arranged in continuous bands that wrapped around corners, creating ribbons of light. The plan rejected every convention Robie had grown up with. The living room and dining room flowed into each other, separated only by a central fireplace. Built-in furniture eliminated the need for freestanding pieces. Hidden mechanical systems provided modern heating and lighting without cluttering, the aesthetic purity. Even the entrance was unconventional, tucked to the side rather than announcing itself at the center. Robie was captivated. This wasn't just a house, it was a manifesto. Wright quoted him $5,500 for construction. In 1908, that was a substantial sum. Not astronomical for someone of Robie's means, but significant enough to require careful planning. The average American home cost around $3,000. Wright's design would cost nearly twice that. But Robie didn't hesitate. The price seemed almost irrelevant compared to what he would receive. A masterpiece, a legacy, proof that Frederick Robie had not just succeeded in business, but had transcended the ordinary limitations of his class and generation. Construction began in 1909 on a lot at 5799 South Woodlawn Avenue. From the first brick laid, the house announced its difference. Wright specified a unique Roman brick, longer and thinner than standard varieties. Each course emphasized the horizontal thrust of the design. The mortar was raked back, making the bricks appear to float in thin lines of shadow. It was painstaking work, expensive work that required craftsmen willing to submit to Wright's exacting vision. The steel beams that supported those dramatic cantilevered roofs had never been used quite this way in residential architecture. Engineers scratched their heads. Contractors questioned whether it would work. Wright insisted. The calculations were sound. The vision was clear. Trust the design. And it worked. The roofs extended into space with nothing visible beneath them, creating deep overhangs that shaded the interior from harsh summer sun while allowing low winter light to penetrate deep into the rooms. It was architecture as sculpture, function and beauty achieved simultaneously. Inside, Wright designed every detail, light fixtures of his own creation, furniture built into the walls, art glass windows that transformed sunlight into geometric poetry. He even specified the placement of planters and the types of plants that would complement the architecture. This was Wright's philosophy in action: total design, complete control, the architect as master of a unified artistic vision. Robie watched his dream take form, brick by brick, beam by beam, window by window. His wife, Laura, was expecting their second child. Soon they would move into this revolutionary space. Their children would grow up in rooms filled with light and possibility. Dinner parties would astonish their guests. The house would be photographed, published, discussed. Frederick Robie would achieve something that money alone could never buy: immortality through architecture. By 1910, the house was nearing completion. Wright had pushed the boundaries of residential design further than perhaps anyone had before. The living spaces flowed with unprecedented freedom. The integration of interior and exterior was seamless. The attention to detail was obsessive. Standing in those rooms, you felt something shift. The old rules no longer applied. This was a glimpse of how people might live in the future: unencumbered, modern, free. For both Wright and Robie, the house represented the culmination of their ambitions. Wright had created his masterpiece of the Prairie School, a design so pure and so radical it would influence architects for generations. Robie had commissioned a monument to his own success, a physical manifestation of his journey from ordinary origins to extraordinary achievement. The house was finished in 1911. $5,500, every penny accounted for, every detail executed to Wright's specifications. Frederick and Laura Robie moved in with their two children. The future they had imagined was now their present. The dream was real, solid, permanent, or so they believed. What neither man could have known, standing in those luminous rooms as the final touches were completed, was that this house would demand far more than money. It would consume marriages. It would witness betrayals. It would stand as both monument and warning about the true cost of perfection. The foundation was laid. The structure was sound. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. The problems began almost immediately, though they were slow to reveal themselves. Wright had built a masterpiece, but masterpieces are rarely easy to live in. The house demanded things from its inhabitants that neither Frederick nor Laura Robie had anticipated. Those soaring, cantilevered roofs that so impressed visitors, they leaked, not constantly, but persistently. Water found its way through joints that Wright's aesthetics had insisted remain minimal. Each heavy rain brought anxiety. Buckets appeared in corners. Stains bloomed on ceiling plaster. Wright, when informed, seemed almost offended that reality would dare intrude on his vision. He made adjustments, sent workers, applied new materials, but the leaks persisted, a reminder that even genius could not entirely bend physics to its will. The revolutionary open floor plan created its own challenges. Sound traveled freely through those flowing spaces. Privacy became an elusive luxury. When guests gathered in the living room, their conversations echoed into bedrooms. When children played, the entire house resonated with their energy. Laura Robie, practical and increasingly weary, found herself negotiating spaces that had been designed more for aesthetic impact than domestic reality. The built-in furniture was beautiful but inflexible. You couldn't rearrange a room to suit a mood or a season. Wright had predetermined every relationship between objects and space. The custom light fixtures required special bulbs. The art glass windows, while stunning, were fragile. Maintaining the house wasn't like maintaining a conventional home. It required constant attention, specialized knowledge, and a budget that seemed to grow with each passing month. But these were minor irritations compared to what was unfolding in Frederick Robie's business life. The Excelsior Supply Company, which had seemed so solid in 1908, was struggling. The economy was entering a period of uncertainty. Competition intensified. Robie found himself working longer hours, traveling more frequently, scrambling to maintain the income that supported not just his business, but his $5,500 architectural statement. The house, which was supposed to symbolize his success, had become a weight. Property taxes on such a prominent home were substantial. Maintenance costs exceeded his projections. And the emotional toll of living in a house that was constantly being photographed, analyzed, and discussed by architecture critics began to wear on the family. Laura grew tired of strangers appearing at their door, asking for tours. Tired of living in what felt increasingly like a museum rather than a home. She had married Frederick Robie, not Frank Lloyd Wright's vision of the ideal modern family. The marriage began to fracture under pressures that had nothing to do with the house, but everything to do with what the house represented. Frederick's obsession with status and success, his willingness to sacrifice comfort for appearance, his inability to see that his family needed a home, not a monument. Meanwhile, Frank Lloyd Wright was facing his own unraveling. In 1909, while the Robie house was under construction, Wright had abandoned his wife and 6 children. He left Oak Park, Illinois, the prosperous suburb where he had built his reputation, and fled to Europe with Mama Borthwick Cheney, the wife of a former client. The scandal exploded across Chicago society. Wright, the man who preached about organic architecture and honest living, had shattered his own family. Newspapers denounced him. Clients canceled. Commissions. His practice, once thriving, began to hemorrhage work and reputation. He was in Europe when the Robie house was completed, his career in America in tatters, his personal life a subject of gossip and moral condemnation. The house he had designed as a symbol of modern, enlightened living was built by a man whose own life was anything but enlightened in the eyes of his contemporaries. This was the hidden reality beneath the Robie house's elegant facade. It wasn't just a building, it was the physical manifestation of two men's ambitions, and both men were discovering that ambition extracted prices they hadn't agreed to pay. Robie was learning that owning a revolutionary house didn't solve problems. It created them. The constant maintenance, the public attention, the financial strain. The way the house seemed to amplify every tension in his marriage rather than providing the domestic harmony he had imagined. And there was something else, something harder to define. The house had its own presence, its own demands. Wright had designed it with such totality that it resisted adaptation. You couldn't casually change something without disrupting the entire, carefully calibrated system. The house wasn't a passive container for life. It was an active participant that insisted things be done its way. Living in the Robie house meant submitting to Frank Lloyd Wright's vision of how life should be lived. For some, that might have been liberating. For the Robies, it became suffocating. By 1911, less than a year after moving in, the marriage was in serious trouble. Frederick and Laura's relationship, stressed by business pressures and personal incompatibilities, couldn't withstand the added weight of living in a house that demanded perfection from its inhabitants. The children sensed the tension. Rooms that were supposed to bring family together instead became stages for arguments. The fireplace, which Wright had positioned as the spiritual heart of the home, witnessed more conflict than warmth. Frederick threw himself deeper into work, perhaps trying to justify the expense of the house by earning enough to maintain it. Laura withdrew, emotionally and eventually physically. The dream they had shared was dissolving, and the financial pressure intensified. Robie's business continued to struggle. The gap between his income and his expenses narrowed dangerously. That $5,500 investment, which had seemed so reasonable when his prospects glowed bright, now loomed as a monument to overreach. He began to consider options he had never imagined when he first approached Frank Lloyd Wright. Could he sell the house? Would anyone want to buy such an unconventional property? Could he afford to keep it? Could he afford to lose it? The house stood solid and beautiful, its brick walls glowing in the afternoon sun, its horizontal lines cutting clean across the Chicago skyline. To passers-by, it was a triumph. To architectural photographers, it was a masterpiece. To Frederick Robie, it was becoming a prison. This was the reality hidden beneath every architectural photograph. Behind every carefully composed image of the living room, with its geometric windows and built-in seating, was a family falling apart. Behind every exterior shot, showing those dramatic cantilevered roofs, was a man drowning in debt and regret. Wright, from his self-imposed exile in Europe, knew nothing of this. Or perhaps he knew and didn't care. The house existed now. It would be photographed, published, studied. It would influence the course of modern architecture, whether the Robies thrived or suffered within its walls. The building had already escaped its first inhabitants. It belonged to history now. But history hadn't finished with Frederick Robie, or with the house. The worst was still ahead. The leaks continued, the bills mounted, the marriage disintegrated, and Frederick Robie began to understand a terrible truth that Frank Lloyd Wright had never mentioned during those early, enthusiastic meetings. A house designed for the future might be impossible to live in during the present. Beauty might demand sacrifices that no reasonable person should make. And sometimes, the price of a dream is everything you hoped the dream would protect. The house on South Woodlawn Avenue stood unchanged. Brick, steel, glass, exactly as Wright had envisioned it. But the people inside were changing, breaking, preparing for a crisis that would transform Wright's architectural masterpiece into a monument of a different kind entirely. A monument to loss. 1912 brought the reckoning that Frederick Robie had been dreading. His business failed. Not gradually, but catastrophically. The Excelsior Supply Company collapsed under debts and competition, taking with it Robie's income, his status, and his ability to maintain the house that was supposed to symbolize his permanent success. The irony was brutal. The house stood as solid as ever, but the man who commissioned it was falling apart. Everything Wright had built in brick and steel would endure. Everything Robie had built in business and marriage was crumbling. He had lived in the house for barely 14 months. 14 months of leaking roofs and mounting bills and architectural tourists, and a marriage disintegrating under pressures the house somehow magnified rather than sheltered against. Laura left first, taking the children. The divorce proceedings were bitter and public, another humiliation for a man who had built a house to announce his triumph to the world. Now that world watched as Frederick Robie lost everything the house was supposed to represent. The $5,500 investment that had seemed so prudent in 1908 was now an anchor dragging him under. He couldn't afford to keep the house, couldn't afford to maintain it, could barely afford to think about it without feeling the full weight of his mistakes. He had to sell. But who would buy Frank Lloyd Wright's masterpiece? The house was too radical, too unconventional, too expensive to maintain for most potential buyers. It wasn't just a home, it was a statement. And in 1912, with the economy uncertain and Wright's reputation tainted by scandal, that statement had lost much of its appeal. The house that was supposed to bring Robie immortality instead brought him ruin. He sold it at a loss, the new owners acquiring Wright's vision for a fraction of what it had cost to create. The revolution had failed its revolutionary. Frederick Robie left Chicago, seeking opportunities elsewhere, trying to rebuild from the wreckage. The house he had commissioned, the dream he had funded, the monument he had hoped would define him, stayed behind, solid, permanent, indifferent to his suffering. Meanwhile, Frank Lloyd Wright was experiencing his own descent into crisis, though his was darker and more terrible than mere financial failure. He had returned from Europe in 1911 with Mama Cheney, the woman for whom he had abandoned his family. They established themselves at Taliesin, a new home and studio Wright built in rural Wisconsin. It was supposed to be their sanctuary, a place where they could live freely according to their own principles, away from the judgment of Chicago society. For a while, it seemed to work. Wright began to rebuild his practice. New commissions arrived. Mama managed the household. They lived openly together, defying convention, creating a life built on their own terms. But convention has ways of extracting revenge. on August 15, 1914, while Wright was in Chicago on business, a servant at Taliesin went mad. Julian Carlton, a man Wright had recently hired, set fire to the living quarters during lunch. As Mama Cheney and her 2 children fled, Carlton attacked them with an axe. Mama died. Her children died. 4 others died. Taliesin burned. When Wright returned, he found ruins, bodies, the complete destruction of everything he had built with Mama. The scandal that had followed him from Chicago had now turned into genuine tragedy. His personal life, already controversial, became the stuff of nightmares. The man who designed the Robie house as a temple to modern, enlightened living had watched his own life become a Gothic horror story. His architectural vision remained pure and influential, but the man behind that vision was shattered. And the Robie house, the masterpiece he had created while his first marriage was collapsing, stood in Chicago as an artifact of a different time. A monument completed just before Wright's world exploded. A reminder of ambitions and dreams conceived before tragedy taught harder lessons about the cost of perfection. The house had outlasted its first owner's dreams. Now it was outlasting its architect's innocence. New owners occupied the house on South Woodlawn Avenue. They lived with the leaks and the maintenance costs and the constant attention from architecture students and critics. They made what accommodations they could with Wright's inflexible design. They endured. But they too would eventually leave. The house was already developing a pattern. Owners arrived with enthusiasm, gradually discovered the reality of living inside an architectural manifesto, and departed when the costs became too great. It wasn't just money, though money was always part of it. It was the psychological weight of inhabiting a space that insisted on its own importance. The house didn't adapt to its inhabitants. It demanded they adapt to it, and most people eventually grew tired of adapting. During the 1920s and 30s, the house passed through several owners. Some appreciated its architectural significance. Others simply needed a large house in that neighborhood. None stayed very long. Each left behind another layer of the house's growing. History as a place too perfect for ordinary human habitation. The roof continued to leak. Maintenance continued to consume resources. The revolutionary open floor plan continued to create privacy problems. The built-in furniture continued to resist modification. The house continued to be exactly what Frank Lloyd Wright had designed, regardless of what its inhabitants needed. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the house began to be seen not just as an architectural triumph, but as something more complicated, a beautiful burden, a masterpiece of design that was also a masterpiece of impracticality. By the late 1930s, the house faced a new crisis. The University of Chicago, which had been expanding its campus, wanted the land. The house was in the way of institutional ambitions. Plans emerged to demolish Wright's masterpiece and replace it with a dormitory. The house that had survived financial ruin and personal tragedy now faced the ultimate threat: erasure. The reduction of all that vision and expense and suffering to rubble, replaced by something utterly ordinary. Wright, now in his 70s, heard about the demolition plans. His reputation had recovered somewhat from the scandals and tragedies of earlier decades. He was recognized as one of America's most important architects. But he was also still struggling financially, still fighting to maintain relevance in a world that often seemed indifferent to his genius. The thought of the Robie house being destroyed galvanized him. Whatever pain and controversy had surrounded its creation, whatever suffering it had witnessed or caused, it remained his masterpiece of the Prairie School. It represented a moment when his vision was at its purest and most radical. He began a campaign to save it. Letters, interviews, public appeals. The house was more than just his building, he argued. It was a piece of American cultural heritage. It represented a turning point in architectural history. To destroy it would be an act of vandalism against the nation's artistic legacy. The irony, perhaps lost on Wright, was that he was now fighting to preserve something that had brought its first owner nothing but misery. The house that had consumed Frederick Robie's fortune and witnessed his marriage's collapse was now being defended as a cultural treasure worth any sacrifice to maintain. What was it worth? That was the question hovering over every discussion about the house's future. Worth the $5,500 Robie had paid? Worth the ongoing maintenance costs? Worth the struggle to preserve it against institutional pressure? Worth the emotional toll it had extracted from everyone who had tried to live inside its uncompromising beauty? The crisis deepened. The University of Chicago was powerful and determined. Wright was famous but aging and without the resources to purchase the house himself. The house stood silent, waiting, as its fate was debated in boardrooms and newspapers. For the second time in its short history, the Robie house faced destruction. First, the slow destruction of failed dreams and broken marriages. Now the swift destruction of demolition and erasure. Both threats revealed the same truth. Beauty and significance were not enough to protect something from the forces that governed ordinary life. Money mattered. Practical concerns mattered. Institutional power mattered. All the architectural genius Wright had poured into those brick walls and cantilevered roofs couldn't shield the building from the basic economics and politics of urban development. The house had been built as a triumph. It had become a burden. Now it might become a memory. And the question remained, what do we sacrifice for greatness? Frederick Robie had sacrificed his marriage and his fortune. Frank Lloyd Wright had sacrificed his first family and, in a sense, his innocence. Future owners had sacrificed comfort and financial stability. Was it worth it? Could it ever be worth it? The house couldn't answer. It could only stand there, perfect and problematic, waiting to discover whether its beauty would save it or its burdens would finally bring it down. The house survived. Not through Wright's advocacy alone, though his voice mattered. Not through public sentiment alone, though that helped. It survived because enough people recognized that some things, once lost, can never be recovered. In 1957, a coalition of architects, preservationists, and concerned citizens raised the money to purchase the house from the University of Chicago. Wright himself contributed to the effort, though he was in his 90th year and had little to give beyond his name and his passionate belief in the building's importance. The house was saved, restored, transformed from a private residence into a public monument. People could now tour the spaces where Frederick and Laura Robie had fought and loved and ultimately failed. They could stand in rooms where Wright's vision had first taken physical form. They could see what $5,500 had bought in 1908. But saving the building was one thing. Understanding what it represented was something else entirely. Frank Lloyd Wright died in 1959, 2 years after the house was preserved. He never lived to see it become the cultural landmark it is today. He never saw the thousands of architecture students who would make pilgrimages to study its proportions and details. He never witnessed how his prairie school masterpiece would influence generations of architects around the world. What he did see in those final years was a building that had outlasted everyone who had shaped its early story. Frederick Robie was gone, his business failure and personal struggles largely forgotten, except as footnotes to architectural history. Laura had remarried and built a different life, far from the house that had witnessed her marriage's end. The subsequent owners had all moved on. Only the house remained, exactly as Wright had designed it. Those cantilevered roofs still extended impossibly into space. The brick walls still stretched in elegant horizontal lines. The art glass windows still transformed light into geometric poetry. The built-in furniture still insisted on Wright's vision of how a room should be arranged. The leaks had been fixed finally through careful restoration work. The maintenance systems had been updated. The building was now cared for by professionals who understood its significance and its quirks. It had become what it perhaps always wanted to be, not a home, but a monument. Visitors walk through those spaces today and see genius. They see innovation. They see the birth of modern residential architecture. They see why Frank Lloyd Wright is considered one of the greatest architects America has produced. What they don't always see is the cost, the marriages that failed, the fortunes that evaporated, the years of struggle to maintain something that resisted being maintained, the emotional weight of living inside someone else's uncompromising vision. The house has been studied, measured, photographed, analyzed. It appears in every important history of modern architecture. It has influenced countless buildings around the world. Students learn its proportions. Architects reference its innovations. Tourists add it to their Chicago itineraries. All of this is real. All of this matters. The Robie House genuinely was a revolutionary building. Wright genuinely did push the boundaries of residential architecture further than perhaps anyone had before. The design genuinely did influence how we think about domestic space, about the relationship between interior and exterior, about the role of ornament versus pure form. But it was also the house that broke Frederick Robie, the house built during the collapse of Wright's first marriage, the house that consumed resources and resisted adaptation and demanded sacrifices from everyone who tried to live within its walls. Both truths can coexist. Beauty can be real and devastating simultaneously. Innovation can cost more than money. Genius can be inseparable from pain. The question the Robie House poses is not whether great architecture is worth pursuing. Of course it is. The question is subtler and harder to answer. When we celebrate buildings like this, what are we celebrating? The vision that created them, or the willingness of others to bear the costs of that vision? Frederick Robie paid $5,500 for his house. But the real price was his marriage, his business, his peace of mind, his dream of what success should look like. He got a masterpiece. He lost almost everything else. Was it a fair trade? He certainly didn't think so. By the time he sold the house and left Chicago, he probably cursed Frank Lloyd Wright's name. The revolution Wright promised had devoured him. And yet, the house stands. Changed hands dozens of times, survived demolition threats, been restored and preserved and protected. It will almost certainly outlast everyone reading these words. In some fundamental way, Wright won. His vision endures. His name is remembered. His influence continues. Robie is a footnote. The clients who came after are barely remembered at all. The house consumed them and moved on, caring nothing for their struggles. demanding nothing but that its own perfection be maintained. There is something profound in this, something about the relationship between art and life, between permanence and impermanence, between the objects we create and the lives we live while creating them. The Robie House teaches us that beauty has weight, that innovation requires sacrifice, that the price of greatness is often paid by people whose names we'll never know, whose struggles become invisible beneath the gleaming surface of achievement. It also teaches us to ask harder questions when we encounter beauty, not just to appreciate the achievement, but to wonder what it cost. Not just to admire the vision, but to consider who paid for it and whether they thought the price was fair. Frank Lloyd Wright believed that architecture should serve life, that buildings should enhance human existence, that design should liberate rather than constrain. The irony is that his masterpiece of these principles became a building that constrained more than it liberated, that enhanced the architect's reputation while diminishing the lives of those who tried to inhabit it. This doesn't make the Robie House less significant. If anything, it makes it more so, because it reminds us that even the most beautiful objects emerge from messy, complicated, painful human realities. That perfection on one level can coexist with failure on another. That what we preserve as cultural heritage was often lived as personal burden. The house sits on its corner lot today, meticulously maintained, carefully protected. Children pass it on, their way to school, probably not noticing. Architecture students sketch its details, calculating proportions. Tourists photograph its exterior, marveling at those cantilevered roofs. And somewhere in all of that, if you listen carefully, you might hear the echoes of Frederick Robie's footsteps. A man who dreamed of permanence and got it, though not in the way he intended. A man who wanted a symbol of success and commissioned a monument to failure. A man who paid $5,500 and discovered the real price was incalculable. The Robie House is a masterpiece. That truth is undeniable. But it is a masterpiece built on ruins, and perhaps that's the most honest thing we can say about it. Beauty emerged from pain. Vision required sacrifice. The cost of dreams was paid by dreamers who woke to find their dreams had devoured them. Wright's house stands. Robie's life shattered. Both facts are true. Both truths matter. And between them lies everything we need to understand about ambition, architecture, and the American pursuit of perfection at any price. The Robie House reminds us that every building has two stories, the one we see in photographs, and the one lived by people inside. Sometimes those stories align, often they contradict, always they reveal more together than either could alone. What other American estates hide similar contradictions? What other architectural monuments were built on foundations of broken dreams and sacrificed lives? If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing to explore more histories that challenge what we think we know about the places we've learned to admire. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on the price of perfection. And if you know a building whose true story deserves to be told, we're listening.